Hello everyone, Simon Jacobson here, and I welcome you to another session, Wednesday night. It's always a great honor to speak to you and to share a few thoughts, and hopefully we all can be enriched by this journey. Being that today is July 4th, which in the United States of America is called Independence Day, I thought it's appropriate to talk a little about independence. Are you independent? Is the big operative question. And we all make a big fuss about being fiercely independent, about individuality, about the freedoms we have. And it's a great blessing today, the fact that we are able to move about as we see fit, teach our children as we see fit, practice or not practice as we see fit. And basically the basic freedoms of the Bill of Rights in the United States, the right of speech, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, are all great, great blessings. Especially when you think of it in context of what has been going on the past year, the past years, the past centuries. And you look back 500 years ago with the monarchs ruling, and basically no one had freedoms. So independence is today a given. We're born in independence. On the other hand, those forces that I just described, are all about forces that constrict us from outside. What about the forces that constrict us from within? You can be free, legally free, you can move about, you can express yourself as you see fit, but there can be psychological demons and psychological forces that keep us trapped. And there, it's a whole other story. That nobody can really legislate or not legislate. That's something that we have to look at into our own hearts and souls. So it's seemingly a very appropriate subject to discuss on a day like this. And just to put it in context of the Jewish calendar as well, we're also about to enter this week the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks are the traditional saddest time of the Jewish calendar, that are the time when the destruction of both temples took place. So the 17th of Tammuz, which will be this weekend, this Shabbos, is the day that both temples, the first temple, second temple, were surrounded. Well, according to some opinions, it was a different day when it came to the first temple. When the Babylonians surrounded the first temple, and then the Romans the second, they surrounded Jerusalem, the walled city, and 3 weeks later, they penetrated, they pierced the walls, and they finally burned down, tragically, both temples, which is Tisha B'Av. So this is also an opportunity to talk about independence and freedom on that level. Now, the Beis HaMikdash was the holy temple, the place where the Talmud and the source and our sages tell us, and the Kabbalah and mystics teach us, is a period in time when revelation was conscious here on earth, when there was a marriage between heaven and earth. And the destruction of the temple symbolizes a type of spiritual concealment, which we till this day deal with. But the interesting thing is that during the temple, the reason the temple was destroyed, especially the second temple, it says because of a sinas chinam, baseless hatred. People hated each other, disliked each other. And as a result, the temple was destroyed. So were they free or were they not free? They had godliness. And today, when we don't have a temple, are we free or are we not free? So what exactly does the word freedom mean? And can we access it in our times? And what does it take to become a free human being, an independent human being, not only from the outside, but from within? Because frankly, as much freedom that a person has in the outer levels of life, if you're not free within, what is it worth? There's a fellow I know, grew up in wealth and affluence. He had everything he needed, everything he wanted. Completely a sense of total entitlement. And as he put it to me, I grew up in a gilded cage. A gold gilded cage. Which means he got everything he wanted. Never lacked for anything. Not material, not literature, not education, anything he wanted. But psychologically, he never found himself. He was always living in the shadow, as he puts it, of his parents, especially his strong father, who controlled him with money. So he was given everything he wants, but he could not find himself. I meet him now. When I meet him, he's already in his 40s. And he's in many ways, as he puts it, like a child. Has never matured. He never had to fight for anything. So is this a free person? I know we all envy anyone in that situation and would say, you know what? Give me all the wealth. Give me all the blessings in life. And then I'll worry about it. That's what many people would say. But I submit here that even though it looks so appealing from the outside, the fact is, however, it can be a living hell to have everything on that, but have it in a cage where you can't make a move. So let us begin with defining the word freedom. What does it mean? As I said, on a very practical level, if you probably look it up in a dictionary, freedom means freedom of movement. When you're in prison, for example, so you're inside of a cell, a locked cell, and you don't have the keys. You can't move about freely. You can't go where you want. You can't travel where you want. You're locked in a cell under someone else's control. Your schedule is controlled, your feeding habits, your meals are controlled, your feeding, everything is controlled. I'm just using that as an example. So freedom with me, being freed from prison, freed from your cell. You can go about where you want, what you want, where you want, when you want. That is usually a definition of freedom. Take it a little more politically, as I mentioned, days of old, someone else could decree that you are unable to do certain thing and you are forbidden from doing it, whether it made sense to you, whether you liked it or not. No one asked you, and you were not given any vote about many of your choices. Now you could perhaps sneak about and do things illegally, etc., but it could be also at the risk of your own life. Others controlled your decisions. So that, of course, is not just a physical prison of bars inside of a physical space. That's a whole control of your whole life, of what you'll do, the opportunities you'll have, how far you can go, how far you can't go. Some argue, and I'm not going now the radical conspiracy theories, that even today, with so-called democracy and freedom, the people who are in power, the people of influence, the people of money, still control the rest of us because they control the markets, they control the trade, they control the money flow. So in many ways they keep the lower class down. But it's also true that today there are many more people in that category. So though it's correct to say that perhaps there's still that type of control, but there isn't one monarch. Maybe there's 20, maybe there's 200, maybe there's 2,000, maybe there's 200,000. There's no doubt that a person who's in power and control and has the money, those that have, don't necessarily want those that have less to join them. For many different reasons, whether it's psychological reasons, or it's because you feel that if everybody gets, I will have less. Whatever it is, however you want to build in, however you want to define that, whether it's inherent to capitalism, to put down those that have should put down those that don't have. However you twist and turn it, there's definitely a certain truth to it. So there you have, even with our modern times, do we truly have freedom? But of course the counter argument is that if a person applies himself, there are people who are not born in wealth, and they made it. And despite the conspiracies, and despite the efforts of others, if you maneuver, and you're a genius, and and have mazel, and so on, you could also get breakthrough, and then you're on the other side. And today there are more such opportunities. That's the argument. Today with the internet, for example, commerce and other opportunities have definitely made it possible for many more people to gain wealth and gain strength and gain power. There's no question about that. However, there's still the psychological fears, the psychological attitude that some people have, that they will always remain, I will never have enough. That's maybe due part to the conspiracy of others making us feel that you're always going to be a middle class, lower class, etc., etc. But as I said, that's our attitudes. You could have a change of attitude and decide, you know what, I'm going to make it. So there's no doubt there are more opportunities today. I'm not going to say that it's total freedom and everybody's willing to join you in and celebrate your success. We live in a dog-eat-dog world, and there are plenty of challenges. But all this doesn't really address the most important thing of all, which is the psychological element of freedom. I just alluded to it, but the psychological element of freedom. And that is that even if you have all these definitions of freedom, that you can move about as you wish, that no one's telling you what to do. And even in a world like ours where there is a certain type of control, how does a person really get into a state of mind that allows them to truly feel independent? That is the presenting challenge and question. So let's talk about this somewhat from a Kabbalistic, Hasidic perspective, especially considering that I've been discussing in the last weeks since Shavuos, when the centennial of Ayin Beis began, 100 years ago, when the Rebbe Rashab began delivering this epic discourse. So I've been trying to touch upon the themes even in the weekly classes. I definitely do it every day in my Ayin Beis class, which is for everyone to participate in. Every morning we have another class, and we post every day another chapter. We're now up to chapter 41 in Ayin Beis, and there's also later chapters. You can see it all on YouTube. Just do a search on Google or YouTube, and you'll find Ayin Beis. But I've also been connecting the classes to this theme, and in this week's chapter, it talks about that verse, that Balaam, who's commissioned to curse the Jews, ends up blessing them. Is the verse where he says, "Mi mana offer Yankif." Who then can count the dust of Jacob? Umisper Reva Yisrael, and the number of the multitudes of Israel. Or Reva is interpreted in different fashions. But the bottom line is, who can count the dust of Jacob? Basically, he's giving a compliment that they are beyond number and beyond the ability of being able to conquer them. That was what Balaam was complimenting the Jewish people. But he uses the interesting word dust, which begs the question, dust is not always refers to something that's very positive. You know, we have the expression that yes, you'll be multiplied like the dust on the earth. But there's also the expression to be multiplying like the stars in heaven. That seems like a far loftier approach, but he uses the word dust. And dust is used in different places in Judaism and Torah. Another place it's used, we say it every morning in the prayer, in Hamidah, we say at the end, we say, "V'nafshi la'afer kol tiyah. Psach libi b'seresecha, v'nafshi ka'afer kol tiyah." Which means that my soul, my spirit, l'kol tiyah, v'nafshi ka'afer kol tiyah, should be like dust before all. Psach libi b'seresecha, open my heart to Torah. And that's meant to be understood, not as a negative. That dust here is referring to the concept of bittul. The topic of bittul I've talked about many times. That dust, though it has a negative connotation, it also has a positive one. Where you feel that something doesn't have real substance. You call it like dust in the wind, meaning insignificant. But there's insignificance of a dust that's a negative insignificance, and then there's offer of kedusha, holy insignificance. And that's the level of bittul. What does bittul mean? That you don't feel haughty and proud and pompous. You feel like dust, but not like dust where everybody steps on you, but dust more in the sense of humility. And that is the door that opens up your heart to the Torah. Because when you're filled with yourself, there's no room for something to enter. So when Balaam was giving that compliment, that's what he was referring to. That was really the power, whether he consciously knew it or not, but those were the words that God put in his mouth. That the reason mana, that you can't count them, is because they are but dust. They are like dust. Meaning that they don't consider themselves significant. When you're a whole entity, you're very countable. You count units and you count items based on the fact that this is 1, 2, 3. But when something is completely humble, it's much harder to count. So in this discourse of Balak, which I'm looking at right now, in the discourse in Ayin Beis, he explains this theme and he discusses it in the context of the general cosmic picture. Anyway, so the theme of this chapter, that in this discourse in Ayin Beis, is basically that there are 3 dimensions to the structure of existence. Three dimensions to the structure of existence. If you recall, I discussed this last week at length, and essentially it goes like this. The finite world in which we live has a structure. And that structure is very distinct and very defined. If you take the human body, the structure of the head, the torso, the legs, our arms, our eyes, our ears, every part of the body is a very distinct part. And every part has within it very distinct elements, all the way down to its individual cells. And the real question is, how high can we elevate this part of our finite beings? And this brings me back to the question of independence. Because here's the real issue here. You can be physically independent, move about as you see fit. You can be independent in the sense when there's no one dictating what you should be doing, what you should be reading, what you should be studying, what you should be praying. But as I also mentioned, we also can be trapped within, in a gilded cage. But take this question a little further. Are we truly independent when we are mortal human beings who cannot fly, for example? We have to define our lives by the things we need. We need to eat, we need to sleep. We have needs. And those needs, in a sense, limit us. Are you truly independent in that sense? Would you say that you really are independent and are free of everything? No, there are needs we have. And as such, those needs are going to in some way affect us. If you need love, you can be trapped by love. You can be trapped by the demands of love. You can be trapped by the compromises you feel you may have to make. We grow up as children in our parents' homes. We're vulnerable and they nurture us. That in turn also creates a need. And that need means that we're not independent and they have the power to affect us for good and sometimes, God forbid, not so good. So if we were truly independent entities, which means self-contained, not needing anything or anyone, that would be, so to speak, one would think, the greatest independence. We shall learn that's not the case. So I'm going to the other extreme. Then what is independence if we are defined not just by our needs, but also by the physical structure of existence itself? It has parameters. Those parameters don't allow us to free ourselves from those parameters. As I discussed last week in the issue of dissonance, there's a dissonance that's inherent in existence. So the question is, how does one really reach a form of independence? And this dilemma is actually the one that has plagued and is maybe the great challenge of all of Judaism, and specifically in the mystical teachings, the Kabbalah and Chassidus, and even more specifically in Ayin Beis, in the themes that he's discussing in this discourse of Balak that was delivered 100 years ago. What do we deal with the structure? Now, if the structure was put here by man, you can say a man-made cell is something we can't get out of. But here's the interesting thing. If the structure was created by a divine force, and that divine force itself is not defined by parameters, what does it tell us about the parameters that the divine put in place? So let me make it even clearer. When we talk about the divine, about God, the Spirit does not have any confinements. And yet, this divine Spirit chose to create a world out of structure. Chose to create a world that has defined parameters. As he calls it in Ayin Beis, this is called integrated energies, where iris are in kalim, energies manifest in containers. Everything in this world is made of that. You look at a book, there's letters on the page, there's the ideas it conveys. You talk about us human beings, here I'm speaking words, there are words, the containers, and there's energy within my words. Ideas, passion, feelings, and so on. In the human body, as I mentioned, you have the eye socket, the physical ear, physical nose, physical anatomy, organs, body parts. And then you have the energy that's flowing inside of them. Nothing in existence does not have a container and an energy. Soul and body, or you wish you can call it matter and energy. Today we know matter and energy are reversible. E equals mc squared. But they are still two distinct entities. And you can call a seamless life as being able to join the two. So being that existence is structured, but it's a structure that comes from a divine structure, this is the question in the Kabbalah, and Ayin Beis addresses at length. Is our existence structure, or is it really just a piece of something that is beyond structure that manifested in structure? So think of it like an artist who has infinite possibilities of drawing different pieces of art. And then he chooses to create one piece of art. In this piece of art that he's creating now, he invests all his energy. But while he's creating it, also has other possibilities. And yet, it's manifesting in this possibility right now. So in his mind, which has the ability to envision many different types of art, he's chosen to create one piece. That choosing to create one piece is called in the Hasidic and Kabbalistic language the 10 hidden spheres. These 10 hidden spheres are building blocks, but they're building blocks as they exist in the consciousness of the creator, as they exist in the psyche of the artist. And this is a critical component, which means that the structure of existence is not some peripheral or incidental thing. It is exactly the way it was envisioned by the artist, be such a structure. In other words, the structure is essentially coming from a place that's beyond structure, that chose to manifest in structure. And the significance of that is far-reaching, because it means that the structure in which we live does not trap us, but on one condition: dust. You have to free yourself from the structures that we worship, because we worship our structures. So yes, we have to eat and we have to sleep, and we cannot fly without an airplane, and we cannot jump on and we have limitations into our health in many other ways. And yes, when we love, we're invested, and therefore it has an impact on us. The question, however, is, are you bound by those structures? Those structures trap you or not? And that's what comes down to our attitude. Which means there are two ways to look at structure. And let me use another example for this. The human body is absolutely structured. But when the structure works effectively, it can do things that are far beyond the sum parts, the sum of the parts of the structure. Musical notes are structure. There are that many musical notes on the scale. That many musical keys on a piano or on any instrument. And yet, when you play it, music itself lifts your spirits far beyond the size and shape of the musical notes, and far beyond the size and shape of the definitions that have produced that music. In other words, the result is far greater. Using the structure, you're able to reach beyond the structure. So we have these choices all the time. Are you going to play the music, or are you just going to bang on keys? Let's talk about it in human interactions. I am speaking to you right now. We have conversations. We have many conversations today. I'm sure you've had some conversations with people. What are your conversations like? Are they words that are talking about structure, meaning the weather, the different expectations, the different obligations and responsibilities we have? Or if you use those words to express something soulful, to sing, to help a person to play the music, I mean that metaphorically speaking. When you use those words, the words from the heart that enter the heart, you say a kind word to someone, you say something sensitive, it's the same communication. One is trapped by the structure, and one transcends the structure. And that's completely up to us. Because you see, we too have two parts to us. One part that is a structure, that's our bodies, our physical world, ruled by the parameters and the laws of nature. And then we have a spirit, a soul. And our soul, within our bodies, is not limited. It has endless love. It has endless compassion. It has bottomless music. And it can do anything it wants in that context. Now, once upon a time when others held a gun to our heads, yes, they may not have let you express yourself. Today we can express ourselves, but it doesn't mean we're expressing ourselves in a free way. Just because you could express yourself doesn't mean you're doing it in a free way. So how do we translate freedom? Based on this, you know what freedom is? Freedom is the ability to do something, think something, say something that's not imposed upon you by anything, by any force. Not just by another person, not also forces within our psyche that impose themselves upon us. It's you truly expressing yourself. So the bottom line is, the real question, who is the real you? If the real you is just an animal, if the real you is just a product of the structure, then as far as you dig, you're always going to go back to the structure. But if the real essence of the structure is the vision of an artist that put it here, and that everything around us in this world, as structured as it is exactly the way an infinite artist with infinite possibilities was able to envision it, Then when you really dig deeper, you have the option to reach that place that's beyond structure, even within the structure. So you can use words like "I love you," and with that you mean something far more infinite than the word LOVE. Just like the music is far more infinite than the actual notes that produce the music. And this is the critical component, that is the critical ingredient that's necessary to reach this place. It's called bittul. It's called getting yourself out of the way. If you worship yourself and your tools and your structure, then you live by it and you die by it. Then you have basically written the script, and you have basically written yourself to become a victim of the own structure that you worship so much. Worship money, then money enslaves you. If you do not worship the structures that are man-made or that we live in, that may be God-made, but we don't worship them, then the structure becomes simply a springboard, a stepping stone to reach greater places. And that's how the mystics look at the world. Everything is an opportunity. Wherever you go, you're hungry, so you could say, hey, hunger is a form of slavery, or it's a form of lack of independence, a form of dependency is the right word, on something else. No. You make a blessing. Eat it the right way, you elevate a spark. A spark is not finite. The same food, the same musical note, suddenly releases an infinite amount of enormous energy. So matter contains tremendous energy, but it can only be released if what? If you don't worship matter, and if you don't allow matter to become such a substantial thing in your life. That's called miman offer Yaakov, like dust. If matter is a mountain, a powerful mountain, and you consider it as power, and size matters, then you have written your own script. That size and matter will control your life. When the scouts went into Israel, they said, it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. We see giants. We see power. We cannot conquer it. They've written their script. As we've discussed once in that chapter where they say, we saw ourselves in our own eyes, we saw ourselves as little grasshoppers. What were they objectively smaller than the giants in Israel or not? It doesn't say they were smaller. It says we saw ourselves as smaller. You see yourself as small. Here, the small meaning big, actually. Small meaning that you value the material power that you see around you, and you see yourself as small compared to it, not humility, as insects. Then you die by it. Then it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. And now they also see you that way. When you project strength, when you project that you're not worshiping the material world, you project that you are, not that you're a powerful person, but that you are dedicated to something far greater than you, doesn't matter what the size of anything is. You can overcome anything. Look at the story of Yud Beis Tammuz, which we celebrated this past week. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, 1927. One man stood up, a regime, the Soviet Union, communists, Bolsheviks, the people who had so much power, but his spirit could not be vanquished. And when he said to his captors, he says, yes, we will see who will prevail. Look today, 85 years later, who prevailed. And you see the story throughout history. The Jewish people, as Balaam says, Miman offer Yaakov. Who can count their dust? Because they're not significant in their own eyes as big entities, they can't fall. Who falls big? The bigger you are, the greater you fall. Mordechai would not bow down to Haman. Jews never bowed down to material items. They never worshipped anything but a higher God, a higher reality. And they saw themselves as not that significant. They took the cause more seriously than they took themselves. And as a result, they gained eternity as a reward. Not a reward as some type of thrown award, it's a direct result. Worship matter, you are then going to be born and die by it. You don't worship it, and you see it as dust, then it's not countable. Then it goes in under the radar. Then it has that ability to channel in experiences that are far greater than yourself. So going back to the Ayin Bey's discussion, basically it comes down to that, he says there are 3 levels to the idea of the vision of the artist manifesting in structure. And the first level begins in the vision, in the artist's vision. Then, as he puts it, there's a tzimtzum, a concealment, where those energies become distinct. Now, the artist wants to begin to paint. Item 1, item 2. In the vision, they're all united. they're all united with each other. There's one vision of the image of the painting, of the piece of music. And that image is connected, as I said, to all the other possibilities in this artist. And then comes the next stage, he begins distinct entities. Then comes stage 3, where these energies manifest in containers. As you recall, everything is matter and energy. As they manifest in containers, now they've taken on real shape and form, to the point that as they evolve further, they become a structure like our existence, where you can convince yourself that the structure is all there is. And we're bound by the structure. But if you realize the structure is just a reflection of the energies within the containers in the world of Atzilus, as he puts it, in the world of unity, that in turn goes back to the distinct entities in stage 2. Back to stage 1, all in the vision within the mind of the artist. Then the structure of existence is not a force that traps us, it's a force that redeems and liberates us. But one condition, you have to look at it that way. You ever read a book and you're so immersed in the reading of it, you don't even realize you're reading words. You get so immersed that the story takes over. What's happening? And then you stop and you say, hey, 1 second, there are words written on the page. There are 5 words. You don't even realize you're turning pages. What happened is you got so immersed in the energy within the words that the words didn't distract you. Now, good words, when someone is a good writer, they know how to do that. The same is with the universe. We get distracted by the words, by the letters, as I discussed last week. The letters that are separate, they're all over, scattered all over the world. Our lives are scattered in that fashion, and we don't know the story. But when you hear the story, suddenly the music begins to emerge. And as such, you start seeing something bigger. So the goal is, how do you get there? Is you need to have bittul. How do we begin? By having bittul. You wake up in the morning, before you think about how hungry I am, and I have a whole regimen and schedule, and I have to exercise, and I have to travel, and whatever it may be, moda ani, I acknowledge. Just those 2 words. I am like dust. Not dust in a bad way. I acknowledge the life that has just been given to me. I stand in awe. Like dust in the wind, I stand in awe of something greater than I am. I stand in awe that my soul has just entered into my being. And that's the beginning. Nafshi ka'afala kayaltiya. That you feel as if you are sublimated, subjugated to something greater. Then then your heart gets opened. An empty cup allows everything in. A full cup can be greatly, very full, beautiful, but it's only as full as you can fill it. The emptier you are, the more you can allow in. This is the secret of love. It's the secret of all relationships. It's the secret of being receptive to a new idea. The more you empty, the more receptive, the more like dust, the more you can experience. If you're not like dust, if you're a whole ego, an entity to yourself, and you have a whole description of your achievements, which is all beautiful, that doesn't let things in, because you already have these developments. You already have all these achievements all over the place. So you don't necessarily experience or not allow an experience of something that is beyond you. Mimana Offer Yankov. And so we have these 3 stages. I was just looking inside the Ayin Beis to see something I wanted to share. So one of the things he says here about these 3 stages is that it's compared to, even in mathematics, what he calls Nakuda Kav Shetach. Nakuda means a point. So in math you have a point, a line, and then a plane. A point is the single smallest measurement of space. It's actually not even a measurement. A point does not take up space. There are infinite amount of points in a line. A line is the shortest distance from one point to another. So if you have a point here, a line would be the shortest distance. And a plane is when the line spreads out, and now you have what's called shetach, an area, a space. It may still be 2-dimensional. He explains in every process of structure, you have these 3 things. Everything starts with a point. Then it becomes a kav, a line. And then it becomes a space, an area, a plane. So here too, in the artist's vision of the structure, everything is in a point. So look around. Everything that comes to life begins with a seed, with a point. The seed in the ground, the seed that fertilizes an egg, that gives birth to a child or to any creature. Everything begins with a seed, or the seed of your imagination, the seed of a concept. You plant a seed in someone. It begins with a point. Everything is concentrated there, and from there it begins to expand. When we look at our lives, we already see the expanse. We see the details. We see not one point, we see many points. We see lines, and lines that have turned into planes, and planes that have turned into cubes, and have turned into all kinds of different dimensions going in every possible direction. But it all begins with a point. The point is where it all started. When you say Moda'ani in the morning, you're connecting to the point. And that point you then want to make sure that it's infused in the line and all the details of your life. So Nikud de Kav Shetach, these three steps, point, line, plane, are the three stages. The first level is where the energies are all concentrated in one place. The whole structure is in the vision of the artist. The next stage is where it begins to transmit. The transmission is a point becomes a line. So now there's length. There's no breadth, there's no width, there's only length. And then once it spreads, goes with length, once it goes long, basically horizontal, then it becomes vertical. And then it spreads out and it becomes a full-bodied entity. Now we begin our lives, we see the space. You're suddenly here. You start thinking, what else is there? But in truth, it all began with a point. So the challenge is, how do we reconnect to the point, and how do we make that point permeate and infuse all the details of our lives with that concentrated focus? Everything is about that concentrated focus. So you have to find the hub. So to go back now to the issue of independence. Are we independent? Well, we don't begin by being independent. We're dependent on others, first on our parents, on on peers, on friends, on educators. We're dependent on all kinds of physical needs we have. And as a result of all these dependencies, we develop psychological dependencies. The psychological dependencies that can trap us, drive fear in our hearts, not make moves. And though we may be blessed with opportunities, we don't always go for them. Do we have the courage to go for them? So independence on that level is physical independence, and perhaps of movement, of speech. But are you really saying everything you're able to say? Are you really free? And are you really free from the structures of existence, whether they're healthy or not healthy? Because remember, it's the structures of existence that can go both ways. The structures of existence that we're dependent on others can end up haunting us and becoming the root of our skeletons and of our ghosts and demons that haunt us. If we were not dependent on the structure, if we were not within a structure, we wouldn't have any of that. So here we have the two options. Either we continue to be trapped by the structure, and thus we write our script. Our independence will be very limited. Even if you may have illusions that you're able to do anything you like and go on vacation anywhere you like, but are you really free? The structure is there, all around you. How others think about you, shame, all the fears that we have, not wanting to grow because we will stand out, we will be judged, the insecurities. What are these all coming from? They're coming from a place of structure. Connect, however, to the place that God said, I wanted you on this earth. I want you because you have an indispensable contribution to make. No one but you can make it. Period. That's why you're here. Everything else is secondary. What others think, the limitations of the rules of the universe, those are all at your disposal to be yourself. And I'm giving you all the strength, God says, to be yourself. If a person has that type of absolute focus, that's when they start becoming free. Because then you're focusing not on what the structure is telling you, not telling you. You're focusing on what you're supposed to do with it all. You're part of the vision of an artist that wants you to create something magical. And this leads me back to the discussion about the temple and the destruction of the temple. The temple, by the way, was a structure, a very defined structure. In the Torah you have detail, probably more than anything else, of how the temple should be built. The service in the temple, exactly like this, not like that. What day you bring which offering. Kol yem v'yem, every day has its offering. And over yemei batel karbonei, the day passes, you can't bring an offering tomorrow for what was supposed to be brought today. A structure within a structure within a structure. And yet, what was the purpose of the temple? Built for me this structure, this migdash, this tabernacle, this sanctuary, and I will rest among you. Who's I? God. God is going to rest in a defined structure. Well, King Solomon had this problem. When he was told that God will rest in this temple, it begins with a portable sanctuary, the Mishkan that they traveled with throughout the 40 years in the wilderness. But later would be built in a permanent way in Jerusalem. After different stages of having temporary Mishkans in different areas and places, Galgal and so on. Then it was built in a permanent thing. What does King Solomon say? He wonders. Surprise, he says. Bitmiya. In a surprising tone. Shamayim v'shmei shamayim lo yichal kalucha. The heavens and the heavens of heavens cannot contain you. Afki abayis hazeh. Can this mortal, or let's put it this way, this physical, limited structure created by mortals, this can contain you? The heavens and heaven of heavens can't contain you. And God says to him, yes, read your own question, just take out the question mark and exclamation point and replace it with a statement, with a period. Hashamayim v'shmei shamayim lo yichal kalucha. Read it that way. Heavens and the heavens of heavens cannot contain you. Afki abayis says that. However, this house can contain you. Of course, the big question is how? Because remember, God is neither finite or infinite. He's beyond both. And an artist is an artist that can create an infinite amount of combinations or finite ones. And in the finite one is infused all his personality, including the infinite and beyond the infinite. And so when he makes his painting, this structure, this is what he wants. It can achieve, and it becomes a container to receive that which the heavens and heavens, which have their own structure, but actually their structure is their undoing. Because of their spiritual superiority, don't allow anything more into them. They're already filled. They're like the wise man that's very literate and educated. So he's appreciating his stature. He doesn't have room for anything else. His cup is full. It's the pauper, the one who knows nothing, the dust, who's freed himself from his own ego, from his own appreciation, even of his own qualities, that this house, this simple, modest house of bricks and mortar, in this material world, if you dedicate it to something higher, this structure becomes a springboard for beyond structure, for the divine presence. That was the temple. But then something happened. And this is key. The temple is not the container per se. It's the people that build the temple. What does it say in that verse, as the Shalah emphasizes? Which means, build for me a sanctuary and I will rest among you. It should have said among in it. In Hebrew, a translation. I build a structure and I will rest in it, in the structure. Would you say I will build a structure and I will rest among them? Who's this them? You're only dealing with one single structure. Because the whole point of the temple was to be a channel, was to be a platform for the presence of God in the hearts and souls of the people. The temple actually was built, the structure of the temple was built similar to the structure of the human being, which is built similar to the structure of the cosmic order, which is built similar in the image of the divine, Tselem Elokim. The temple was built in that image as well, to remind us about ourselves. So it's not God is interested in resting in some building in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. He's interested in resting in a building that the people are receptive to and want. And they build a building aligned to themselves and to the divine structure. But obviously this is predicated on one key element, that the people participate. Barchenu avinu kolanu ka'echad. Our Father blesses us when we stand together. The temple cannot stand when the people, b'seicham, that was supposed to be a rest among you as a unified entity, are now splintered, fragmented, fractured, fighting with each other, baseless hatred. How can I rest in this building? You're not there. You're not joined together. You have now each become an entity on your own. And when you're an entity on your own, you could be counted. You're no longer like dust. Nafshi kavful hakel tiyeh. Now you could be counted. Now you're entities. The divine presence can't rest among entities that are significant in their own eyes. Like the Talmud says, Anivahu. God says on the pompous person, him. And the Baal Gaiva, the person who's arrogant. God says, me and the arrogant person can't rest under one canopy. There's no room for both of us. As the Kotzker Rebbe says, where is God? Wherever you let him in. So what we have here is a temple that in its structure it can manifest and contain beyond structure the divine, but on one condition, with his bittul. With his bittul, with his emptiness, with his suspension of self, then anything can rest there. When you become an entity, you get in the way. Look at it with education of children. If a parent is thinking about himself or herself, you're not caring about the child. The child will never benefit from that. When you empty yourself of your interests and say, what's good for my child? What's good for my student? What's good for the person I love? Then things happen. Your subjectivity is not trapping you. So when there was sinas chinam, baseless hatred, the temple could not stand. It was broken. When the people are broken, the temple gets broken. And as a result, the Shekhinah, even though it says in the Temple Mount remains holy, but in the full revealed conscious way, it cannot manifest. So bottom line is, when the people want independence, you want freedom, you want to have a connection to that which is beyond, you need to be free yourself. You need to not be caught up in your own trappings, which conflict with others, to the point where you begin disliking others, where you become becoming such an entity in your own eyes that you don't really care about anyone else but yourself. Self-interest. So to create freedom, to achieve freedom, true independence, you need to have that bittul. And that's what we honor when we come to the beginning of the 3 weeks. The 17th of Tammuz is when the Babylonians and later the Romans surrounded Jerusalem. And it would take 3 weeks for the siege to finally pierce the walls. God was waiting. They still could have repaired things, but they didn't. Then they breached the walls and then burned down the temple on Tisha B'Av. This year, interestingly, the 17th of Tammuz is Shabbos. We don't fast on Shabbos. Tisha B'Av will also be Shabbos, 3 weeks. And we'll fast on Sunday, unless Mashiach comes in between. So there's an expression that says, it's called a tainus nitche. This is called a fast that is deferred. A fast that is delayed, nitche. You push it off to the next day. So there's an expression from Hasidic Rebbes that says, Kivin shenitche yitche. Since it was pushed off, let it be pushed off completely. Let it be deferred completely. Which means when Shabbos, the 3 weeks begin on Shabbos and end on Shabbos, we have an additional strength. What does Shabbos reveal? Shabbos we don't mourn. Shabbos reveals the deeper purpose of the concealment of the 3 weeks. That it should be a catalyst to wake up the passion inside of us to repair the rifts that were created among us, that allowed the rift to be created between heaven and earth with the destruction of the temple. So when it starts on the Shabbos, we have an opportunity, an extra day. 3 weeks aren't beginning yet. They're beginning on Sunday. Again, only if we do what's right, they won't even begin on Sunday. They'll be initially a positive time, that as the prophet says, that these days shall be transformed to joy and celebration. Yehavchu yomim elu. But when it's on Shabbos, it's telling us here you have an extra day. Do your thing. Every generation in which the temple is not rebuilt, it's considered as if it was destroyed. Why? Because we're not talking about, we didn't live through thousands of years ago when it was destroyed. But we have the power through our unity, through our bittul, which is what brings Avos Yisrael. Like he says in Tanya chapter 32. What's the secret to love? Bittul. Because as long as you make your body primary and your soul secondary, your body then is dominating. Materialism by definition is time, and it occupies time and space. I'm here. I need my space. I need my bank account. I have my needs. My needs will conflict with someone else's needs. They definitely compromise others' needs because two people can't occupy the same item. But if you make your soul dominant, and your body and the material world secondary, there's room for love. It's not just about my needs. There's another person involved. It's transcending your needs. You transcend time and space. You transcend the limitations of the structure to access beyond structure. And this is in our hands. And this year, as we begin the 3 weeks, in a Shabbos, we have even more power to do so because it's like an opening that sets the stage and sets a tone for us doing it in a completely new way. So here you go, the lesson of Independence Day 2012, the message. Are we independent? Well, it's one answer to that question. Depends how bottle you are. More bittul, more independence. More bittul, the more you have the opportunity to allow in the forces that take your structure to a place that's beyond structure. The less bittul, the more your structure becomes your gilded cage. It becomes your glass castle with a glass ceiling, the limit to it. And that's the key, is not to allow our egos and even our passion to reach beyond structure to become our defining force. The key is to have the mimana of Yankiv, to sense that sense of humility, that sense of your dust. Everything is higher than you. When you rise up, when a wind blows, for example, a storm strikes, dust is the only thing that's immune to a storm. Because the trees, or any object that's a little higher than the ground that protrudes, is in the way and is vulnerable and subject to be affected by the winds if they're strong enough. Dust, because it's dust, it's in the ground. The wind can blow the dust back and forth, but it can't destroy it. Because it's not standing in the way. It's not blocking the passage. It's a transparent state that allows anything through. In Hasidic thought, it's called malchus. It has no power, it has nothing of its own, like the moon. And therefore it reflects everything. Therefore it can contain and absorb everything. The secret to life, empty, you absorb. The emptier you are, the more you will absorb. And you can absorb literally the infinite. That's the message that we take away from this Independence Day. The message we take away from these 3 weeks, as we enter these 3 weeks, to do activities, to be involved in things, as he says at the end of the Haftarah that we'll read at the end of the 3 weeks. That Zion is redeemed through law, through study, and its captives through kindness, through generosity, through tzedakah. These are the forces that help us redeem us from our own traps. So you want to know what the best thing you can do when you feel trapped by your demons? You go to therapy by all means. Do everything you can to be able to heal within. But the greatest thing is stop thinking about yourself. Help another person. Reach out to another. Moda'ani. Free yourself. Empty yourself from your own, even from your own pain. Because pain could also be part of your own ego. I'm not saying you don't deserve to cry. Don't deserve to be, everyone deserves that empathy. But when you worship even your pain, you also become a whole. Then you make it an entity more than it should be. By giving to others, you're starting to focus not on yourself, but on something beyond yourself. That's a container for freedom. That's a container for feeling freer within. So the counterintuitive thing, most people say, I'm so desperate, let me grab onto everything. What happens when a drowning person starts grabbing? They not only end up hurting themselves, they end up pulling down the person that's coming to save them. Because they're so desperate for survival, they're grabbing on everything, and they, in process, kill everything with them. When you have humility, healthy humility, not the humility that we're talking about, false humility that comes from life breaking you or other people putting you down. I'm talking about humility in the face of God, in the face of recognizing, God created me. No matter what has happened in my life, I'm an indispensable gift. I'm an indispensable agent of the divine to do something with my life. So there's no time right now to wallow. There's no time for self-pity. Now is the time to act. And when you don't allow your own pity to become a whole entity, be like dust in a positive sense, then you say, what does God want of me? I said, Moda'ani, what is my mission today? Reach out to others. Don't focus on yourself and your needs, especially when you're hurting. Obviously, if you need immediate help, you need to go reach out for help. But I'm talking about not dwelling on it, not obsessing with it. Then, your soul becomes free, empty. Then what happens? That which is beyond structure enters inside of you. And the things that you're so afraid of, the things that have so trapped you, melt away. Are not forces that stop you from achieving what you have to achieve. And then you can achieve true independence of accessing your soul's deepest voices. Where is your soul in the process of when we're hurt? It goes back into a shell like a turtle that hides under its thick shell. Goes back into its cave. The soul is waiting to be released, but it can't be released if you are dwelling upon yourself and your own, whatever it is, whether it's positive or negative things. The soul emerges when it senses that there's not something there that's getting in the way. When do children respond? When they see you care. If you're busy with your own stuff, a child will just retreat. If you say, I want to hear what you have to say, that's when people speak. People are not going to speak to you, especially people who are hurt or people who are sensitive, if they don't see you're there. How can you be there? By getting rid of the things that distract you. So sitting with a text while somebody's trying to share with you something very personal, not exactly conducive for them to communicate with you. And think about it the other way around. How would you feel? So this is about learning in these 3 weeks about being a more sensitive human being, which means to be a more bitteldik human being, which means to be more dust and therefore less countable, not less accountable, less of a being that's being counted, and as such a container for the infinite. And that is the secret, my friends, of true independence. God should bless you all, that with a minimal amount of efforts, that our demons should be pushed aside, and we should do our part in focusing on the light that we can bring to the world around us. What are we here for? Not what everything else is here for us. What are we here for? To serve. What are we here for? To humbly recognize the higher calling. And then one finds their true independence. So true independence is not by getting more, but is by giving more. Not by hoarding and owning and acquiring, it's by letting go. And then the real you emerges. And the things that you've worshipped become less worshipable, less powerful, because you're not worshiping them. You're giving them power when you worship. So God should bless us all. Should have a very inspiring and transformative 3 weeks. That it should be one that we initially experience and enjoy by using our tools and a catalyst of these Saturdays to turn them into powerful forces of good. And we should all celebrate real freedom. And as we do so individually, collectively, our sparks come together. As we see with flames, when they come together, there's something far greater than the sum of the parts. And with this, I bid you all a very good week. And we shall be together again next Wednesday. Thank you very much.